let's talk a little bit about fractions. A lot of people don't like fractions. The nice thing is that you can do fractions on a calculator, and I'll try to show a little bit of that. But I think it's not a bad thing to actually be reminded what fractions are, how they work, kind of how to work with them a little bit. And that really, I mean, that could be a whole course. Fractions are not trivial. And the reason they teach them to you in 5th grade is not because they're easy, but because they're important. And you can't really do a lot of other things in math until you have at least a basic understanding of fractions. Okay, so let me just kind of remind you just a little bit, you know, kind of what's going on. So the idea here, let's say you have 3 4s, right? So it's kind of like a pie, right? And the bottom number tells you you're splitting your pie into 4 pieces. The 3 here tells you that you have 3 of those 4 pieces, right? And it would look like that. So that's what a fraction is. So if you were asked to add, like, let's say, what's 3 4s plus, we'll say 5 6. Okay. Well, this would be like adding this to 5 6, which would be like cutting your pizza into 6 pieces, which, you know, would look something. I'll try to do it. Won't be perfect, probably. It would look something like that. And 5 6 means you're taking 5 of those 6 pieces. It looks like that, right? So here's 3 4s, there's 5 6. And what you want to do is you want to add these two together. Well, in a sense, it's not clear how to do that. It's like adding apples and oranges together. These are different types of pieces. So this is why you actually, when you add 2 fractions together, you need to get a common denominator. Okay? And so it is a mistake to try to add these 2 fractions together by adding numerator and then adding denominator. So it's not 8/10, right? That is a huge mistake. The reason sometimes people, I think, make that mistake is when you multiply 2 fractions together, you do multiply numerator and multiply denominator. Okay, it's pretty simple. But when you add, you have to get a common denominator. So in a sense, adding 2 fractions is more difficult than multiplying the 2 fractions. Okay? So to add, we got to get a common denominator. And so what you're asking is, what number does 4 and 6 both go into? The smallest number that they both go into? Well, they both go into 12, don't they? So 12 is going to be my common denominator. Okay? So 12 is actually known as the least common multiple of 4 and 6. Okay? So you're getting the least common multiple. But the way to think about it is, which number do both 4 and 6 go into? Well, they both go into 12. Okay? So now I can get an equivalent fraction. So if I have like 3 4s, well, if I double this and make this 6 and that 8, so if I double the top and double the bottom, 6 8s is the same as 3 4s. Okay, those are equivalent fractions. In fact, I could take 6 8s and I could reduce that down to 3 4s. And 3 4s would be the lowest terms, right? And so what I'm doing is I'm kind of like doing the reverse of reducing something to lowest terms. I'm kind of not reducing, but increasing this into an equivalent fraction that has 12 as a denominator. So I have to multiply 4 by 3 to get 12. That means I have to multiply 3 by 3 to get 9. And so that would be 9 12ths. So 9 12ths is the same as 3 4s. In fact, if I reduce this down to lowest terms, I would divide the top and bottom by 3, and I'd get 3 4s. Okay, similar here. I take 6, multiply it by 2 to get 12, so I got to multiply 5 by 2. And so I would get 10 12ths. So these are just equivalent fractions to these. It's the same, but now in both cases the pizza is being cut into 12 pieces. So if I split each of these in half and each of those in 3 pieces, then these pizzas would be cut into 12s, and then you would have 9 of these 12s and 10 of those 12s, and you'd combine them together to get 19 12s. Okay, so that's a lot of explaining. So the point here is to add them, you got to get a common denominator, in this case 12, and then you got to convert these into equivalent fractions of that denominator, and then to add, you just multiply, or you just add the numerators over the common denominator like that. So you keep the common denominator stays the same, but you add the numerators. And now I get 19 12s. And that's more than one. 12 12s make up a whole pizza, right? So 12 of these 19 make up a whole pizza, and then you have 7 left over. So sometimes we write this as a mixed number, 1 and 7 12s, right? 1 would give you 12 12s, plus 7 more would give you 19 12s. So that's like converting to a mixed number. Oftentimes when we're dealing with algebra and things like that, we keep it. We don't use mixed numbers. We keep it as an improper fraction. But you can actually add these on a calculator. Okay? And the way you do it is there's a fraction button. In this case, for this calculator, let's see if I can focus. Wow, that's pretty blurry. Let me focus here. That's better. Okay, much better. So this is the fraction button on this calculator. So different calculators have different fraction buttons, but I can do 3, and then I hit the fraction button. Oops, 3 4s, and then I can add 5. Oops. 5 6. Okay, and hit equals. And there it gave me 1 and 7 12. So it actually gave it to me as a mixed number, 1 and 7 12s. But it uses this sort of notation. That's just how this calculator works. And I think the TI-30 might work that way as well. The graphing calculators, I'm not even sure if they do fractions. I know you can convert things between fraction and decimal on those, but I don't know if there's a fraction button. Okay, but these scientific calculators like the Casio and the TI-30s, they do have that fraction button. Now I can change this. If you look up above this button, it's D over C, and that means an improper fraction. So with this calculator, anytime there's something above the button here, then I hit second or shift and hit that button. And what that just did is it made it into the mixed number. Okay, and then I can actually convert that to a decimal. And the way that you do that on this one, there's usually a button that you can go between decimal. And let's see if I can figure out how it works here. I'm not seeing. I'll probably see right after the video's over. Okay, but if you have a different calculator, it would work a different way. Let me encourage you, if you have a calculator, look up on YouTube. Usually there's tons of videos that explain how these calculators work. One way you can change a fraction, like if I wanted to change 19 12ths into a decimal, is I can just take 19, I can take 19 and divide that by 12. And then that actually changes it to a decimal. And then I think if I hit this fraction button, there it makes it into a fraction. Okay? And so you can take answers and then make them into a fraction by using the fraction button. So that's how you use a calculator to work with fractions. And I'm not going to go a lot because there's a lot you could talk about. But if you do multiply two fractions together, like I was saying earlier, it's easier. You multiply numerators and then multiply denominators. It would look like that. And now this isn't in lowest terms. I have a common factor of 3. So cross this out, divide it by 3, I'd get a 5, right? And then this, I would get an 8. So this reduces down to 5/8, like that. Now, when you're actually multiplying two fractions, instead of multiplying them together first, what you could do is if the kitty corner here, if these two can be reduced down right away, you can do that. And so the 3 and the 6 can be reduced down. I can take that and make it a 1, and the 6 will be a 2. And now I just multiply numerator and denominator, and I would get 5/8. And so in this case, by reducing it beforehand, it saves you from having to reduce it at the end. It also saves you from having to multiply bigger numbers. These numbers are a lot smaller and usually easier to multiply. So canceling out before multiplying is often very helpful. Okay? And then the other thing is if you had to divide two fractions. So if I had, like, let's say 3/4 divided by 5/6, like that. If it was being divided, then what you do is you change this to a multiplication problem by taking the first one, multiplying by the reciprocal of the second one. You flip over the second one. And now it becomes a multiplication problem. You multiply numerator and denominator, and I actually can cancel out a 2 here, and I would get 3 times 3 would be 9/10. So 3/4 divided by 5/6 is 9/10. Okay, so that's how you divide fractions. It's just when you divide, you got to make sure that you don't reduce at this point. You can only reduce when it's in this step, when you're actually multiplying the fractions together. That's when you reduce. Okay? And the other thing is, let's say you have something like 3/4, and you're gonna divide that by 5. And that looks really weird, but you can take 3/4 and divide it by 5, and the way you do it is you treat it 5 as a fraction by putting it over 1, 5/1. So this is 3/4 divided by 5/1. So you could write it like 3/4 divided by 5/1, and then I change it to the multiplication problem by flipping the second fraction over, and then I multiply numerator and denominator, and that would be 3/20. And that would be my answer. 3/4 divided by 5 is 3/20. So that's a little bit with working with fractions. I encourage you to do things by hand if you can, and to develop some skills as you go through the semester, but also know that you can work with fractions using your calculator as well. And it might work a little bit different than this calculator if you have a TI-30 or a graphing calculator, but you can check YouTube and play around with that.